Welcome, everybody, to an event brought to you by the CLG campus. Today, we're going to be talking about community data and metrics. Oh, my. So just some things here. I will be watching the questions if you have any questions during it, too, as we are recording this. 3 is this workshop is the beginning of what will eventually be a course that is going to be in the CLG campus. Basically, to access all courses on the CLG campus, you do have to register there again. Sorry about that. But all the other information on the CLG campus is free, open to read, open to share. And so with that, let's get started.
Hello. Just some slight minor modifications so that I can see all y'all and the chat. I am one of those people, if you are new to me, I adore a super active chat. I love it when people add comments, give their own tips, because let's be real, like the whole point of community is for us to share our superpowers. And there are a lot of people here who also have some amazing measurement chops. I can see Josh Gross here working with Common Room, absolutely adore the Common Room platform. I also see some people from Orbit, the other platform that we are going to see in the presentation as well. We also have Threado. We have a lot of measurement stuff here. So I don't know why I'm calling all of you out. Y'all are still amazing, but go ahead and toss who you are, what you do, and what is one big thing about metrics in the chat for us to go ahead and get introduced and get started. And in the meantime, this is making sense of the community Firehose. So the really fun thing about this presentation is that we have so much ground to cover. As Scott stated, this is actually going to become a full e-course. So we're actually going to have a 2-stage setup here. Today is going to be the workshop, where we're actually going to cover this course. And then we're going to also cover a recorded version of this course where we augment and go a little bit deeper into a lot of these subjects. But also, just like measurement, which is a muscle, it's cyclical, and it's not simply a project. You don't make a dashboard and then move forward. For that exact same reason, learning about measurement is also going to be a very large process as well. So we've actually made this a whole thing. So last month, we covered a marketing discussion to ask, hey, marketers, how can you interface with community managers better, especially with Google Analytics? This time around, we're talking about the community managers. And then at the end of this month, it's actually been confirmed going into March, CMX is going to be doing this huge metrics madness month. So we're going to have an opportunity later on in March for us to dive even deeper into this discussion. So this is, it turns out, only one of a huge series of metrics workshops, which I'm very excited about. Before we get too far into this, just some quick housekeeping Scott already covered. I need to actually share my slides, huh? Can everyone see that in full screen there?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So this is going to become an e-course in April. And in order for you to access that free e-course version, you need to go to CLG campus and create an account. That's where the new e-course is going to publish as we move forward into April as well. And then you can always access me through my community Discord. For those who don't know who I am, can you just raise your hand? Let me know if this is your first time meeting me. I might truncate this because I know a lot of all y'all's wonderful faces already. Yeah, so my name is Samantha Venia Logan. I do go by Venia, and I am a social scientist by trade. So I spend the vast majority of my time starting in community way back 2011, 2012, in the LGBTQ space. And I ended up starting a nonprofit organization and a community of 4,500 other queer individuals who couldn't demonstrate or live authentically with their identity. So I went to college and I'm like, how do I cater to these people? How do I make sure that they respect their anonymity, but also are able to get access to resources? And school didn't know. So they went maybe take a communications course, business, marketing, anthropology, journalism. So I took them all. And that's just kind of how I ended up in community and especially in social science. But once I left school, I didn't actually know how the internet operated. So I had to go learn a technical level of that stuff. And I did that at Digital Marketer with Ryan Dice, where I became a full stack marketer from SEO and email marketing all the way through to their own community management training with Susie Nelson. Felt pretty amazing to be able to work and receive tutelage from her. After that, I've just been working in communities for almost not even almost, past a decade now. So that's enough about me. If this is not your first time, I'm sorry, you have to hear this. This is at the beginning of every single talk that I do, because I think that it's very, very important that we drill it into your heads. So here's what I want out of this 2-hour workshop with you, right? I want you to be able to plan big. We're talking metric strategy. We're talking developing and understanding how you're going to tag and flag an organic cultural ecosystem that you want to make. And that's one of those things where you need to have this larger scope of understanding. We use the word scope intentionally, but I also want you, do me a favor, progress small. Even though you're going to have this plan, there are going to be a lot of questions and you're going to make a lot of mistakes. I want you to make those mistakes intentionally, because that's how you get good and then get better. Mistakes make better plans. And then this is also going to be slightly overwhelming. We have a lot to cover, but I'm not going away. This course isn't going away. Neither is the webinar. So learn one thing and please come back later, you know? So with that, are we all ready to get started? Please sound off for me in the chat. Let me know. What I would like to know from you is, what is one big complaint that you have about the current measurement paradigm in your work? Go ahead and paste that into the comments and we'll cover them after this section. But I'm going to tell you my big problem as a social scientist. So what's not working for us in the current measurement paradigm? This is the current measurement paradigm. This is the funnel. We go further in depth into how this works in the marketing portion. But suffice to say, the whole idea is for an individual who's joining your community to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm interested in this thing. And then the typical marketer will be like, oh, cool, great, that's awesome. Why don't you perform this action? And we will give you a reward for that action. And depending upon your response, whether or not you like it or don't like it, we will give you another action. So what ends up happening is they raise their hand and then they collect their reward and we add a tag to them. And then they raise their hand again and they collect the next reward and we add a second tag. And we're like, great, this is a conversation that's happening through technology. The point of a funnel is for you to have an intimate conversation with a potential customer at scale. This is the typical measurement paradigm for the modern day. Unfortunately, marketers are really well known for creating 4, 5, 6, 7 different funnels, and they're all really nicely placed. And they say, if the customer has this tag, put them in this funnel. And if the customer has this tag, put them in this funnel. It's very neat and organized. But the community managers around us might recognize that users don't do that. They don't function that way, right? Some users will fall into your funnel halfway through. Some users lose interest and they leave. They go into a general community. They bounce around all of your different funnels and they just kind of hang out without taking that next step. Now, it's the marketer's job to make sure that they do take that next step, but it's also the marketer's job to make sure that they only ask the individuals when they're ready for that next step, when those individuals are ready. And that's the problem with the current measurement paradigm. Funnels only converse with each individual user. You raise your hand and you put down your hand, and tags and flags on the back end change depending upon a single conversation. Unfortunately, when you put a whole bunch of people together around a singular brand, I know that Common Room is commenting right now, communities are peer-to-peer, right? The conversations that you have with other individuals are swaying, changing, and adjusting your user journey as you go into those funnels. And because funnels don't pay attention to that, community managers can't measure their worth, and also the funnels fail to work on the regular. So here's what we're really looking at. This is from Orbit, one of the community intelligence platforms, and we'll be talking at length about the community intelligence platforms here in a little bit. But what I do want you to notice is over there on the right is that small little cone there. That right there is your funnel. And you can see there's some people in it, but they can leave at any time. And there's a certain valence, a certain scope in which your communities are going to participate and engage, where they're at, when they're at it. And what I want you to think about is you don't just have one funnel, you have 4 or 5 funnels, all following in different areas along this line. And it's your job as the community manager to speak to all observers across all funnels, all users across all funnels, all fans across all funnels. And what's really critical is that as a community manager, you're able to measure that whole impact, not just the individual funnels. Now, because of this issue, there's been some very critical problems that have come about. There's a ton of community managers in the chat right now. So let me know what your major problem is. We'll cover those in a little bit. But there are 3 main tools that you're going to end up using that you've never used before throughout your next year, if Orbit's research here is to be believed. And because we're using those 3 tools, you might wonder, what exactly is happening that's causing us to switch our tools so frequently? It's because people are all over the place. We can't measure those specific funnels. So we have 2 major problems as a result of this. On one end, community managers are saying, yo, this isn't it. We don't have enough information. We can't do this. Traditional funnels are too restrictive. People don't use the internet the way that you expect them to. But on the other end, what we tend to receive from our marketers is, well, yeah, people use the internet in all different ways, but we can't create a valid, viable, easy to navigate user journey unless we just focus on what the users do, because they can say a million things. What they do is what matters, and that's what a funnel measures. So in order for us to deal with this dialectical tension, this stress factor of measuring community and measuring funnels in 2 completely different measurement paradigms, there are going to be some things that both departments need to do. On one end, community managers are really going to need to start systematizing the data collection that we collect outside of the funnel and providing it to the marketers. And the marketers are going to need to expand their funnel system in order to make it easier to measure users less creepily. And that measurement strategy needs to go beyond behavior. So in February, and we do have a video recording of this attached to the CLG campus, in addition to a few podcasts. In February, we talked with MeasureMinds, a big leader in the marketing space, about how they could help us as community managers measure community. So you can go over there in order to grab that. There's a QR code here. But today we're going to focus on community builders. And with that, I'm looking at the chat right here. Josh from Common Room. The main goal is to get really familiar with the quality of metrics versus what is interpreted. I find that many communities choose metrics that just aren't easily understood or well connected. Yeah, we're going to be discussing that pretty big on that area, because what a lot of people do, and at the end of this course, I'm going to give you a template, but I don't want you to use that template to be like, here's the metrics you should measure, right? The purpose of this presentation is going to be how to teach you to fish so that we can handle some of your problems. Heather, some of the data I want to track isn't something I can do easily. The metrics available just don't cover it. And you're not a data scientist, right? So it makes it really frustrating. One of the important things is we're going to cover in this course a framework that I hope you can use. Even though you're not a data scientist, you can still focus on measuring the culture in the community where you are at. So hopefully we'll be able to get you there. So here's what we're going to need to do in order to get us there, right? In order to get Heather to a point where she can measure the things that the current infrastructure doesn't allow her to measure. These are going to be the things that we need. And we're going to delve deep into each one of these categories for the upcoming e-course. For the workshop, we're just kind of going to glaze over them, and then I'm going to walk you through actually doing this so that you can play around with the infrastructure before that e-course comes out. So first, we need to know how metrics actually work. Like, what is the anatomy of a metric? How do they abstract reality? And why does the metric abstraction that is currently in the paradigm not work for us? Then we're going to introduce the social scientific models that allow us to properly abstract our data in a way that is more fitting of our content. Using that social scientific process, we're going to, there's that word again, I want you to keep it in mind, identify your scopes so that you can better understand your community and connect it to the funnel stages and steps that you'll find in marketing, support, sales, and data flow management. Then we're actually going to do it. This is where the workshop portion comes in. We're going to map your data flows physically and manually. I'm removing any concept of X platform. So we're not going to move into community intelligence platforms right now. We're going to use a simple spreadsheet, collect simple data, use that data to manually move the data flow. And then all you need to do once you understand it manually is automate it piece by piece by piece using other technologies like a CRM, a Power BI system like Google Studio, and a community intelligence platform. By doing this, we're going to make sure that you can find the right questions and deliver the relevant answers to the right people. So that's what we're going to do now. Let's get started with abstraction. So the core issue in our measurement paradigm is in the way that we choose to abstract data. So the important thing is to understand how a metric properly abstracts. When a person performs a behavior, it's like putting a footprint in the sand, right? A person walked here. They put a foot here, and then the next foot and the next foot tells you overall where they are going. The detailed person might say the footprint is X inches long. It was probably male. The scope person will say it looks like the foot tracks on the beach tracked from the edge of the water to the porta potty over on the other end. So they probably had a behavioral action of needing to use the restroom. In order for you to understand how abstraction works, a base core element, both of those metrics used the footprint, right? But one was highly detailed. And as you move up in scale, you are abstracting that data. You are making more assumptions and more inferences. So let's talk about a typical metric that you might find, one of the easiest metrics in online community. This is going to be daily over monthly active users. John O'Bacon adores this metric, and I think that it is probably the lowest hanging fruit, bar end place for you to start for measuring your online community. So how does this metric abstract? Well, first it starts by defining in a daily active user what active means. What is an activity? And you can have a user publish a new post on your forum, or you can have that user comment. You can have that user add a like or something like that. And then you are inferring and you are ascribing a value to that activity. If they're going to do a new post, I value that more than a comment. So posts will be worth 5 points, comments will be worth 2 points, and a react will be worth 1. And what that is doing is it's attaching a specific activity report on the back end of your CRM or your community intelligence platform or whatever you're using to measure. It is procking that and is saying, count the fact that a new post went up and that it's ascribed to this user. So you've now assigned that activity. And once you have defined the action and ascribed a value to it, you can now go to the next layer of abstraction, which is your formula. You've performed an action, which is worth X value over an amount of time. So today, they performed an action that was worth 5 or 4 points. And then on the back end, you also have a, did this person do any activity at all today? Check the box, this counts. And that allows you to move up to the fourth layer of abstraction, which is your system. This is where your OKRs and your KPIs live. This is where DAU over MAU is actually seen. And while we're at it, we can use this exact same atomic metric system, the new post or the comment, to ascribe activity points. And that gives us top contributors. All of this goes into what we thought was the simplest metric, y'all. These are basic, allegedly, right? That's 4 layers of complex data abstraction, data flow metrics, and connection to do what is the most basic metric for GitHub in the open source community. When you see the contribution calendar on any individual user in GitHub and open source community, you'll see that the amount of activity that they do lightens up the square, and doing any activity at all makes it green. And you can also see up in the top right, Venu actually lauded and appreciated his activity for any given month, basically saying, these are the days that I contributed. And by doing so, you can say, most people are contributing a certain percentage of time over any given month. And of the individuals who engaged on day A, when we did an event, their activity was higher than people who didn't attend. That tells you the event was useful. That tells you that you have an active community. That tells you the percentage or quality of their interactions and whether or not you have community health. All of that from 2 simple atomic metrics. Did they post and did they comment? User by user, right? So this is the most basic of metrics. How do we now expand that to understand the impact of your community health beyond thinking, feeling human beings? It's hard enough to do it with a simple action like DAU over MAU, right? How do you now determine, are people actually having a good time? Is DEI being respected? Are people talking outside of the purview of my public spaces? Are private messages being done? Are people building bonding capital? How do you measure all of that stuff? And the reality is, community managers have to abstract way too much data. There's too many abstraction layers. DAU over MAU is 4 layers of abstraction. The typical marketing metric is 7 layers of abstraction. When we go into community, we're looking at 14, 15. No wonder you can't report your community value and your community ROI, because you don't have a system that can handle all of that abstraction. And that is the very nature of the data Firehose for community. So we're going to go ahead and try and solve it now. I'm actually going to pop back into the comments, take a little bit of a break. Josh Gross, this is important in my opinion. The definition of what constitutes an activity is really important. Yes, defining your activities and defining your actual atomic metrics and what they mean is going to be the very base of your measurement. That having been said, we're going to jump into the social science. Some of you may have already heard this, but I am going to cover this because it's critical for you to understand how the dashboard that I'm going to give you at the end of this workshop is actually built. Now, I'm going to take you back to your 6th grade year, right? When you learned about the scientific method and you learned about isolating a variable and then asking a question, making an approximate guess of what's going to happen, a hypothesis, and then you just tweak that single variable and you learn. And then once you've learned, you have another question. So you end that experiment and you start another one. And then you say, okay, so let's tweak this variable, and you learn, so on and so forth. It's a bunch of repeated processes. The problem with this is that community doesn't happen in a lab. Who here has had the experience where you try to A/B test something and you're like, okay, I'm going to deliver this A/B test to 1,000 people. And then you get a clear response and it's A. And then you're like, okay, cool, great. So my super users loved this. Let's deliver it to another portion of my community. Let's deliver it to support groups or people who are internal to your community. And it works again. And you're like, awesome, they clearly enjoy A. And then you send it full wide. Everyone on your email list gets it. And then suddenly what you were experimenting doesn't work. Everyone didn't like A, they liked B better. And you're like, what happened? What's going on? The variables were exactly the same. It was the environment, or what we call the scope, that changed. And that's the 4 major things that the social scientific process changes for you. First off, instead of running several experiments that are all separate and disparate based upon variables, we are using the exact same data that we had on day 1 to prove or disprove our hypotheses on day 20. This is very much so one long experiment. And instead of focusing on the variables, we don't change a variable, we leave the variables the same. And we simply say, these things, these variables apply to population A. What's happening to population B? Or why doesn't it apply to population C? And in doing so, what we're able to do is we're able to collect enough data over time for us to make inductive assumptions. When you look at traditional metrics, they are deductive in process. This many people perform these actions, which we think means this, which means we can manage these metrics, which means this is our dashboard. What we're doing right now is switching that paradigm. We are collecting data, and then we are saying, we found these particular themes in that data. We're going to go look for more data that either disproves or proves those themes. And the easiest way for us to do this is with two main processes. We're going to go over step 2, which is called coding, and then we're going to go over the rules of generalization. So codification is a process of inductive data abstraction. What that means is we are inferring from data that we've already collected that there might be a hypothesis. In anthropology, we call this grounded theory analysis. We're not going to go too much further into that, but effectively, if you look down here, you'll see someone is saying, I've gained too much weight over the last several years, and I don't seem to be doing anything to get rid of it. So what you're going to do is you're going to theme that, you're going to put a code on it that says, this is about health. And it's a negative statement about health. They're not able to use the system in order to reliably lose weight. So this is a negative comment about health. And you're going to just tag data happening in your community over time. This is very qualitative. And we're essentially taking the sentiment data of our communities and inductively inferring the specific themes and principles. Instead of coming at the data with a hypothesis, we are letting the data make the hypothesis for us. And in order to do this, bit by bit, we are going to rely on something called data abstraction, or the rules of generalization. Now, in social science, there are 5 main valid ways to do this. You can snap this slide. We're not really going to cover it because no one here, I presume, and if you are, we are absolutely immediately best friends, but no one here, I believe, is looking to make an academic white paper, so you don't need to be super critical about this in your daily lives. We want to apply this to your standard area, and it just so happens that every one of these methods actually boils down to one simple formula. A concept, this thing is happening in our community, applies to B population among our user communities and our advocates, only so far as C limitation, but not with our new users or with our support groups. Why or why not? So as an example, we have a high sense of belonging among our super users, but that high sense of belonging is not reflected among our vendor contributors. What happened? Why is that not there? The variables may not have changed, but because the scope did, there is something to be learned there. And that something to be learned can be codified, abstracted, and used for your metrics journey. Now, the easiest way to do this, as I said, here's that word again, scopes, is for you to understand and limit the various aspects of your community. So you're really mapping it out, sort of like a Venn diagram. But I want to spend a little bit of time jumping even further into this, because the orbit model is, at its truth, very simplistic, and yet it's hiding a very critical anthropological concept: how people step over that membrane. So on one end, you have your observers and your users. What does that line, that membrane between observers and users actually look like? Let's borrow a different analogy. Let's say that your community is a cell. And the cell is compartmentalized based upon the purpose, the activity, how close to the DNA the organelle needs to be, and it has a series of membranes. Each time a user comes into your community, they need to see 2 things on that membrane. The first thing is transparency. Can they see past that barrier into the next community enough that they're willing to have value? They want to say, I want to go there. I have a reason to go there. And then once they attempt to make the cross, there's a second aspect of porosity. How easy or how difficult is it for them to transgress that membrane? It turns out that in many cases, your onboarding funnels in your community borrow the same methods and context as a marketing funnel. So your marketing funnel steps are actually passing players via action through your membranes. That's the behavior. But in order for you to understand why or why not they are crossing that membrane, you have to understand the sentiment data to understand why they would take that step in the first place. So you're using deductive for behaviors, inductive for opinions and sentiments. Now, we've covered these concepts. I'm going to really quickly just go through and summarize each one. And then we're going to move first into some brief questions to make sure that you're good on theory. And then we're going to actually move into implementation. So first things first, metrics abstract reality. Deductive processes, i.e. taking a large data set that you've already collected, like behaviors, and turning them into a metric, requires a certain layer of abstraction. And then inductive processes also requires abstraction. In most cases, inductive processes, which most qualitative data processes, requires way more layers of abstraction. And that's what's causing your firehose. In addition to that, you also need to make sure that you use the rules of generalization and the social scientific process to make that inductive process systematic, able to be tagged and flagged, so that when it goes to your marketing team, they understand exactly what happened and why. The easiest way to do that is with the rules of generalization. A concept applies to B population only so far as C limitation. And once you have that, you can begin to map out your community scopes, attach the funnels to the membranes of those scopes, and then you can say funnel behaviors led to this, and then the rest, these sentiments are why they did it. What's really important about this is that your community stakeholders go through a similar process. Just like that cellular feature, if we come back here, you'll see that we have a nucleic cell of your stakeholders, and the community team is right there. Just like your audience is coming into your cell, you are setting a precedent in your team. We want to perform this action in the community, and then you are doing it with active promoters, and then you're doing it again with engaged members, and then you're doing it again with everyone else. So the teams care about precedent and momentum. The community cares about behaviors and sentiment, but your C-suite, they care about the health of the cell. Is the cell about to blow up? Is the cell making us money? Is it ready to split? Is it growing? So what they care about is the results and how. And the easiest way to do this, to measure this, is to build your dashboards along with the layers of abstraction from behaviors and sentiment at the bottom with more detail to a greater scope of results and how. So that's it for the specific workshop theory. I'll take some questions while we're getting us set up for the data sheet and dashboard, and then we'll actually go through this together. But here's what we're looking to build, right? We want to build a dashboard that follows this process from community up to C-suite. So we're going to create a 3 what's in it for me perspective dashboard, where your executive community is going to care about how community is impacting each department and how that connects to revenue. Your teams are going to care about what precedents and goals or objectives is your company setting and how is that building momentum in the community. And then your community pulse, freed up from the other 2 problems, this dashboard no longer needs to prove your community ROI or value. The executive summary is doing that. And it no longer needs to prove whether the community team is doing well. The cross-departmental objectives dashboard does that. This is focused on just community health, behaviors, and sentiment. One thing I want to leave you with is we want to make sure that when I'm giving you this template, you are actively choosing what metrics are going to go on the template. So this template is not going to be a take it and run with it. This is going to be a build this with your marketing team kind of situation. So just make sure that you're not just going with the metrics that I recommend on the template. This is all about making sure that that extraneous information is not led. And Kevin Hartman is like the go-to avatar for your entire marketing team, because I guarantee the marketing team is looking at him. Okay, I kind of feel like I lost the thread on the order of my slides, but that's okay. If you are overwhelmed, I also want to say one last thing. No one is a numbers person. If data abstraction has shown you anything, it is simply that numbers people are capable of keeping in their head all those layers of abstraction and understanding what a metric is doing to the behaviors of the sentiments. So don't worry if you're not a numbers person. Don't worry about the arithmetic. Don't worry about the set. Just worry about, do I see a trend or do I see a pattern? Something doesn't need to say 40 out of 60 for you to recognize it's 2/3 of your activity. And we're going to do that. We're going to make it a lot easier by showing you something called the QAI process. What's the question you're asking? What's the answer you expect? And what information do you require to get it? I'm going to finish. Here's the process. We'll return to this in a little bit. You'll get the slides. I think we're good. So if you would not mind, I'm going to share with you 2 specific resources. Pull those up. And while everyone is pulling these up, getting them set up on their computer, I would love to have some people come on and take questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
So maybe it's just around the word sentiment. So when people are moving from different stages or, from one community to the next, and you want to understand the why and why people are doing that, what are some of the different ways that you would do that? Right. So there's one thing to look at the data and the numbers, but another thing is, and you're saying look at the sentiment, but is that basically like interviewing them? Is it looking at how they're talking about it? Just want to be clear on that.
Yes. So in a lot of ways, when you think of a focus group, right, when you collect a bunch of people from different areas of your community, what you're really doing is creating a scope of community called the small group focus group, right? So you've now created this interview process where you pull one specific user from your community and you ask them a bunch of questions and they start to come up with a theme. After you do 4 or 5 different interviews, you discover all of them said the same thing. So you're like, okay, so let's go up in scope now. So these individuals are saying this, let's put them together and ask them all together and then explore the concept. And the whole time you're doing this, you are inductively abstracting what they say into a systemic process of data. And then you say, in this focus group, this became an issue, but we were primarily hearing it among the super users in the focus group. So let's go ask the whole super user community. And that's where you submit a survey and you say, hey, super users, we noticed this is an issue. Is it an issue? And then they'll be like either yes or no. And then you're like, okay, so why did it come up in my interviews? Let's go to my next scope. And by doing that, you can use different qualitative data research tools at different times systemically to get a better understanding of your scopes and why things are happening and why not. Does that answer the question?
Yep. Yeah.
And that's also, this is also kind of off topic, but one of the biggest issues I have with people who do surveys as a social science is that no one actually realized that you can't just submit a survey and then just be like, oh yeah, the survey is the end all be all, because the people taking your surveys are either people who love taking surveys or people who really care about the topic of your survey enough to give their opinions. The people who don't necessarily care, they're not really going to make it through. But if you look at your scopes, right, and you make the survey step 3, if you go and you do some semi-structured interviews with some people, collect those patterns, figure out what scope this matters most for, and then as a step 2, you go and do a focus group, and then as step 3, you do a survey. Now your survey responses are a billion times more effective because you were able to target the survey at the actual audience that matters.
Mm-hmm.
Other big questions as people are getting their content up. I would also be open to feedback. I know that this was possibly a lot, maybe a bit overwhelming. High score might mean they're expressing anger and frustration, whereas low sentiment or low NPS type of score. Can you explain that a little more, what you meant?
So when you look at just going beyond just looking at the engagement numbers. So if you look at engagement numbers, somebody could be a ranter, right? they could be
Mhm.
engaged a lot, right? They respond a lot, they post a lot, um, but taking sentiment from the definition of, positive versus negative, right?
Yeah.
But most of that could be just like negative rants. And so then the question is, if you want to move that person or not into an advocacy sort of role.
Yeah. I also think it's important, just because someone has negative sentiment for something, and the community intelligence platforms out there do this as well. Threado, Orbit, and Common Room all kind of have this problem where negative and positive sentiment doesn't necessarily put people in camps of like did or didn't like it. Because you
Yeah.
could have super users who are like, I love 99% of the system, but this one major issue that is only attachable to me and is completely esoteric is the thing that I don't like, so I'm going to mark negative. And
Yeah,
you're like,
exactly.
oh, well, great. In order for you to make a disposition metric like net promoter score matter, you have to break it down. You can't put it all together. You can't abstract it into that general system, because NPS is a behavior and sentiment tracking metric. It does not allow you to generalize to your overall industry. So you should be taking a net promoter score based upon your event. So did they like the event or did they like the content? Did they, like for support, they could call in to a sport representative and they could have the worst time with the sport representative, or they could just not like the answer and their NPS is going to be changed regardless. So you have to take NPS on the smaller behavior and sentiment level, and then abstract from that NPS using the qualitative data. So it's not the score that's important, it's the comment.
Yeah.
I think I actually do have a slide that I removed to that effect. Here it is. Yeah. So net promoter score suffers sampling bias a lot. The whole idea is for you to separate the confusion that they may have. So their score might have to do with the product or with the activity they participated in. It also actively polarizes your audience. You are literally saying that the passives don't matter in the system. And in order for you to finish that, you really need to break down your NPS score based upon individual behaviors and activities. So it is not meant to report to a CEO. I know a CEO is going to hate that, but it's not a metric that you report in general. Yes, I can share those for you, Lori. Other questions before we really jump into the activity and we actually like put what we've learned to practice? There we go. And share. Anyone else?
You put those in the chat. There you go. Yeah.
I realized I wasn't really able to keep up all that much with the information. Maddie from India, building a community of practice at My Captain, taking a break this month to explore some new opportunities and learn from people. Awesome. Happy to have you here. Yeah. Do we want to go ahead and get started with the actual template? And I would love it if others could join us on stage as well. Oh, did I just get... did you just send me a message in Slack, someone? Because I temporarily closed my Slack, but the notification went off anyway. Okay. 404 errors. Uh-oh. Let me share it raw
Can you
here.
go back?
Let's give these a go. So there's the raw for the sheet, and here's the raw for the dashboard. And also keep in mind that the reason I gave you those short links is because those are actually maintenanceable. So if I decide to publish a completely different dashboard, that short link will just go straight to the new one instead of me having to send out an old code. So those are always going to be managed and will always go to the most recent source of information. which is helpful, especially since I am going to be doing some major changes to the actual dashboard itself between now and the actual course. We'll send up some additional information when the course is actually published on that. So yeah. Do we want to go ahead and get started with the dashboard and the database? New share, screen share. Okay. Everyone's so quiet. All right. So first things first, here's what we have here, right? So on the left, we have a data sheet, and it gives you an instructable on how all of this works and operates. And again, it's using those exact same 3 principles I gave you, right? How data abstraction works. We need to systematize it for inductive processing because the metrics that you're used to are all deductive. In addition to that, we need to integrate your community scopes with the marketing team's funnels.
Sorry.
Huh? One more time. I didn't hear you. Okay. So we are going to identify your scopes and then your funnels. And then once we have those, we are going to attach sentiment data or qualitative data to your marketing funnels through the use of social scientific coding. So that's what this does. And you'll see down at the bottom that we have several sheets, right? And it should be sharing my screen, right? Yeah. So you'll see down at the bottom that we have setup terms, behavior tracking map, CM field journal, a sentiment tracker, and then a codex. I'll let you know right now, the codex is the most important part of this entire process, because this is really the bleeding heart, the soul of qualitative data codification, right? This is making sure that when you code your data, literally anyone, you could have an intern put on the support team come into this form and start tagging your data the exact same way that you would with your community after years. That's the purpose of the codex. But before we can do that, we need to actually get there. So first things first, you'll notice that there's a community scope column under your setup terms, and then there's a value journey funnel stage. So I've set this up based upon the community intelligence platform that you might want to use. There are a lot of different theories and frameworks and community infrastructures out there for how to identify community scopes. Lais de Oliveira just published hers. There's another one that CMX and David Spinks offers. Orbit offers their own of observer, user, fan, and ambassador. There's also an additional one from Common Room, which is contributors, influencers, pioneers, and members of interest. What you need to do is you need to go through and say, in my community, it is composed of general viewers, of member A, like regular users, and then engaged viewers, event goers, super users, ambassadors. Let's say you have a vendor program. So what you need to do is you need to identify in this column all of the scopes of your community. You're defining the kind of people who are building exclusive spaces for themselves. And then once you do that, I want you to go to your marketing team and I want you to ask them, how do they view or break down their funnels? You'll see tofu, bofu, and mofu here. That's top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. And then you'll see digital marketers, customer value journey, aware, engage, subscribe, convert, excite. How does your marketing team view their funnels? And by doing so, you can now connect in this scope, these activities matter. In this scope, these activities matter. And that allows you to identify your scopes and your activities together. Once you're done defining that, I want you to put down all the places where your community exists. Just, does your community exist on Twitter, YouTube, Discord, Slack? What is the platform? And then I want you to talk about the ways that they can engage. As I said before, in a typical community, you might have forum posts, you might have knowledge-based comments, You might have Slack messages. You might have private messages on Facebook. All of the different ways that your community can interact or discuss with one another, I want you to put in this column. And then I want you to talk about what's your line of service? What's your product? What is the thing that they are ultimately gathering around? What is the thing that you are looking to sell? So for influencers, you might put YouTube channel, or you might put paid course, like my paid magnetic brand course is a product that people might talk about. People might talk about the community charter. People might talk about my software. One of my clients with ChiroTouch, they run a online chiropractor software, and then they also have a knowledge base. So they'll put the software here and then the knowledge base. And then after that, you're going to have your categories. Categories, subcategories, topics, and tags. These specific items, we're just going to guess at for now. But what I want you to do is I want you to start with a tag, which is your lowest level of codification. So this is your atomic metric. And then your tags will start to group together into similar topics. So I have a tag for cheap and a tag for quality. That is now a topic of attention. And then once your topics get big, they'll start to group into categories. So this could be a feedback category. So this is a feedback having to do with something. And then this feedback might be grouped into kudos and uh-ohs, positive and negative disposition. So your category, subcategory, topic, and tag essentially nest within each other. So here's an example. You have a category of department for sales. In that, you have a category of bug reports having to do with sales. The payment portal is having problems, and the reason is because zip codes aren't taken. There's a confusing UI where there's a delivery button that doesn't really make sense. The button is supposed to accept the standard postal code, but it doesn't actually work. You could also have coupon codes where like you're getting a bunch of messages that say the auto reply is broken, or that for some reason the coupon doesn't auto apply in Firefox specifically. So this is a ticketing system, yeah, that you're immediately going to go get fixed, but you also want to tag your sentiment data something similar to this. Super simple, super basic interaction. Once you've set up your terms, and let's take questions about how these terms work. The next thing that you want to do is you'll want to ascribe a value to each of your tags, right? So is there an issue of utility in your product being useful? Is there an issue of consistency? You're just not posting on the YouTube channel on a regular basis. Is it about notoriety? Like people started commenting to other people going, hey, you should check out Common Room, or hey, Orbit would be really great for you. That kind of thing. And again, this is another infrastructure that you can get from really any community practitioner out there. There are plenty different ways of providing awards. This is where your gamification might come in handy. Are there any big questions on the setup terms or what this means? Perhaps we can take someone's brand and do some examples. Would we like to see how this actually works in practice?
Sure.
So one of the things that you can do, let's say, and keep in mind, this is a journey and you're just starting on it. Your muscles have not necessarily moved. Whoa, Common Room did not go to the correct website. Weird. Oh, because it's .com. I'm dumb. That was obvious. So let's say I'm in my Common Room account, right? And this is the more advanced one. I want you to start with a sheet because the whole idea is to plan and start with things physically. But let's say that over time, and this is the demo account that I have, over time, you want to start automating this. You want to start abstracting it, right? So if we go into members, we have this handy little dashboard that collects all of the users in a specific setup. and then tells us how many points they've had. That's your behavior. But also you can click into each user and it gives you sentiment data. And you can tag each individual sentiment data with a specific statement. So let's say we tagged that Pat guy's statement. Let's say that it's positive, and let's say that it's a feature request. If you remember, underneath your tag and flag data, that's exactly the same infrastructure that you have here in order for you to track your sentiment data. So now in your system, you can start to abstract your data by adding specific tags and grouping them together in your system so that when you go back to your members portal, those tags are added and you can now filter by them in order to get a better understanding of your audiences. And now, once you have that, you can now use Common Room to identify your scopes. The big difference between Common Room and Orbit and other community intelligence platforms as a tool is that, yeah, you can tag, and yeah, you can flag, and yeah, you can add codes. But if your team doesn't have a strategy, doesn't have a framework, doesn't have a developed, implemented system for how you're going to track that data, then your tags don't matter. It doesn't matter. You're basically just tagging things for no reason. They're not thematizing, they're not codifying, and they're not abstracting well enough for you to deliver value. So let's have a more simple example, right? The number one step, and this is what I want you to start doing today. Do your first journal entry in this spreadsheet today. I want you to do this to yourself. I started my day working on the Common Room training video that I wanted to do, and then the team discovered some tags were absent in Common Room. That sucks. So that's a negative uh-oh. And then you're just going to add whatever your tag might be. So let's put an example, right? And then what you're going to do is you can add notes after the fact. Like if you're a team lead, for instance, and you have all of your team community members putting in their own journal entries, you can come in and you can now add notes to that information. And if you check this highlight button, what that means is over on the dashboard that we're sending you, underneath your community team performance page, you'll see that we actually have what is the team saying? And you'll see that we have a highlights only box here. And what that's doing is it's collecting all of the different journal entries that you might have. And if you hover over it, there it is. The team meeting went well. I informed our data analyst. So this is highlighted based upon what's happening in this given day, right? Now, that's how that tracks to your dashboard. And you'll notice that your dashboard is tracking Google Analytics. So your behaviors are coming straight from marketing, and you're tagging your sentiment data right alongside it. So here's your community growth having to do with each action that the community is performing. And then you can narrow that by your tags or your channel. Your executive summary, this is to your C-suite. They don't care, right? They don't want the sentiment data. So why report it to them? But who does care? Your community team does. And down here, you can see exactly the information occurring to the field. And once you've got this practice down and you've noticed some specific themes or codes that are coming across in your individual team, your team is scope A. Now you're going to apply those same tags and those same categories to your community sentiment tracker. And what you're going to do now is you're going to go to your Google reviews, you're going to go to your Slack channels, and you're going to say, there's a comment in my Slack, it's a kudos, and it was a result of a support deflection because my community answered the question in the first place. And I'm going to say that this is very much so a bonding capital kind of piece. And in addition to the bonding capital, it's also a merit-based option. So by adding your bonding and your merit-based options here, now you've tagged and flagged this content, and it's going to show up now on your dashboard under your coded patterns and trends analysis. So you'll see here, coded patterns and trends. I have the channel of GitLab, and it's a activity category. And the tension is whether something is too cheap or quality, and it's about merit. And let's say I only want to see negative sentiments. So you can just tag negative sentiment. and it will recalculate that content to give you your breakdown right here under your coded trends and patterns. Now, I want you to tell me whether or not a marketer is going to love seeing this come out of something so simple as this. Simple, how many columns is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 column spreadsheet, right? And you've turned your sentiment data by virtue of using tags and flags into a metric that abstracts exactly like a marketer would. All by using the social scientific process to codify inductive data. Now, keep in mind, this is an example and it's attached to a completely empty process, right? But keep in mind, this is a spreadsheet. This is step 1, right? As I showed you before, when you pop into Common Room or Orbit, when you pop into Threado or Communify, whatever your preferred community intelligence platform is, and there are advantages and disadvantages to each one, you'll need to figure out which one you want. But you are now applying this community management methodology to whatever that platform is. You're going to immediately be able to tell your marketers, here's what the community is saying, here's why your number is broken, and here's how to fix it. Now you have your actions. Now let's talk about marketing specifically. I'd like to take some questions on your codification process before we move into integrating this with your marketing team. Everyone's so quiet. Are people able to turn their cameras and mics on? Huzzah!
We exist.
Yay. Sorry. Are there any big questions? Do we feel overwhelmed? How do we feel?
We feel good. We get it.
Well, the idea now is you've set up your terms, you've set up your system. You can now inductively process your sentiment data. Now, the important question is, how do you get the marketing team on board, right? How do you get other people looking at this? Because remember, this is a what's in it for me thing, right? The community culture, the top 5 kudos, these things went well. The top 5 uh-ohs, these things did not go well. Your social currencies, how do you measure transparency, utility, consistency, and trust? All of this is stuff that you care about, right? The marketing team probably doesn't care about that. They care about how many new users to the platform already had community accounts before they set up their product account, right? That's what they care about. How do you get them to care about this content and data? Well, the answer is to use their systems with them. So you should be using Google Analytics. You should be using Tag Manager, but you don't want to learn those things. Those aren't within your purview. They're not going to give you access to that data, but you need to speak the same language they do, which is what the behavior tracking map is for. What we want you to do here is we want you to identify the community scope that you're going to be in. So let's say your advocacy board is in the promote stage for marketing. And let's say that the user's intended goal in the advocacy board is to make sure that people are providing well-constructed reviews. Are they actually talking about and advocating for your community? And where are those reviews happening, right? So that's their intended goal within that scope. They also have user actions that they're going to take. What are the specific things that they're going to do? They're going to post the review publicly in a Slack, on a competitor's platform or whatever, but whatever they're doing, they're going to praise the team. So what kind of behaviors does this action require? What are the atomic metrics that you're looking for? Well, they have to post a comment somewhere. They have to post with a high disposition. They have to get some response, and that response is going to determine how useful or effective their comment was, right? So you need the ability to measure those posts. And you would also like to know not just reacts, but who commented on those posts, because those comments are going to equal new users. They're going to equal attentive people now in the aware stage of your business. So what you're going to ask for them to build is a system that allows for that value a sense of belonging. And once you have all of this, this is all you need to do. You need to say, hey, marketing team, this is how we're going to measure it in community. I need you to go find the atomic metrics. I don't know why it's duplicating. Like, actually, I do know why that's happening. Oh no. We will fix that later. So as it stands right now, you might have some cells duplicating. The reason for that, if you go into extensions and then app scripts, when you copied the spreadsheet, it comes with a specific line of code. This line right here is broken. So don't worry about that. Just delete the script. It'll be fine. It's okay. My bad. I apologize for that. But what you want to do is go into marketing and you ask them, what are the atomic metrics that will measure my behaviors? How are we going to ascribe value to that? Go build that for me. And then once they do, they're going to come in and they're just going to check that to say it's tested. And then they're going to check this to say it's implemented, right? And once they've done that, you can come in and now say, okay, so the marketing team is now responsible for measuring these things for the community team. And now that it's implemented, we're going to add it to our dashboard. So what this does is it makes the marketing team responsible for community impact as far as building it. And then you report it for them in line with the data they are producing. As a result, they have a buy-in for your community. They have a responsibility as a stakeholder on your community team. You're now integrating and interacting together on a much deeper level. And you've now solved the marketing community red tape issue that we started this whole conversation with in the first place. You've systematized your data. You've given the marketing team ownership over that data. You've connected the funnel to the scope. And you have now abstracted the information well enough that a simple 4 or 5 layers is now possible for you to measure your online community. Now the question is, what metrics are you going to do? On this side, it's behaviors, and then your community journal and your sentiment tracker, that's your sentiment. So we've now covered the entire community culture and community teams metric data set. Now, all you need to do is take these 2 slides and say, what's important for my executive team? And you're going to put it here. And the way that I've set this up for your actual template is you have departmental touch points. How is community impacting sales? How is it impacting marketing? How does it impact content, support, and then like whatever other department? And you're basically going to ask the teams who are responsible for measuring their specific community aspect for you to add their community contribution and then give the executive team an ROI. And at the end of it all, at a glance, you're going to tell them, here's the total support cost saves. Here's the community generated leads that we activated. Here's your lifetime revenue across community accounts. And here's your net revenue from the community this quarter. So once you've built this out, and I just put like metrics here, but each one of these are going to have a different way for you to measure it. Or however, I didn't just want to give you a template and be like, cool, great, run with it. I want you to actually build this out, right? So the spreadsheet is very manual. So you're manually getting connected to the data. Then you're going to connect your dashboard. If we go into the actual edit mode of your spreadsheet, and you go into resources and data sources, you'll see I have Google Analytics attached. I have the sentiment tracker and the field journal attached. This entire dashboard is just using 3 sources of data in a spreadsheet. And it's already this powerful. Now, all you need to do is add an API that brings in your common room data, add an API that brings in your CRM data. And you can focus on the marketing, product, and data flow teams to actually work with you to start integrating data sources to this slide. But ultimately, as you start to get better and as you start to get used to the data sheet and the dashboard, you're going to be able to augment now all of your data moving into Common Room or Orbit. Do we have any other questions? Do we actually want to walk through some scenarios of how you might want to integrate?
I think that might be helpful.
Cool. Do we have any brands that would like to tell us about your community and what you'd like to do? And I can use Orbit this time instead of Common Room to kind of show you Orbit can do it too. Okay. So it sounds like we don't have any direct examples. I've already used mine, but okay, so let's pop into Twitter. You know what? Actually, no, let's not even use a community intelligence platform. Let's just go straight to Twitter. And let's say that for me, right, I want to hop into my account, my profile, and I want to go to tweet and replies. And this is any action that I take plus any interactions that I work on. And I can come down here and I can find people who communicated or interacted with me. And I can just pull this content. So what is a good example? I haven't been too active on, oh yeah, so Jay is a good example. So hey, is there any chance someone is willing to help? So Jay commented, so I'm going to copy that and I'm going to pop into my spreadsheet, go to my sentiment tracker, and I'm going to say this happened today. Oh, right. Let me app script because this script is broken. It's my fault. Get rid of that. Save it. Close it. Leave it. See, and we're doing this. We are troubleshooting live on air. So this happened today, and I'm going to paste it, right? So Control V. Let's get rid of my formatting. And I'm going to say this is positive because he offered to help me. And I'm going to say it happened on Twitter. I'm going to say that it was actually an opportunity. And it was a setup terms. And I'm going to put under tag collaboration opportunity. So now it's going to show up here that I can now select collaboration. And I'm going to say that the value that was added was more bonding capital. Once we've added this now, let's go back to Twitter and let's tag the next thing. And again, a community intelligence platform basically collates and collects all this information for you. So let's go to Venu. And Venu's comment is at Samantha Venia, feel free to use it. So we're going to copy that, toss it in here. And you might find that like this specific data isn't super useful, and that's okay, because what you're going to do eventually is you're just going to scale this. This is Twitter. It's another opportunity. And instead of a collaboration, this is actually going to be an example. And its capital is going to be bridging because I've never communicated with them before. And then we're going to do it again. And again, Orbit is already collecting all this information on a per user basis. If I come to Jay, you'll see we actually just collected this. This is actually a prior conversation I had with him about his power going out. So this is very much a bonding thing. So I'm going to paste that, call this negative because that sucked, call it Twitter. And then this is actually a, let's say for its category, this is a problem, and its subcategory is going to be technology. Its topic is going to be environments. And then its tag is going to be power outage. And again, it could be literally anything. All it needs to do is just come out of the data, right? So you're just going to start by tagging. And then when you notice a pattern or a trend in the tag, then you'll add a topic for that pattern or trend. And then when you identify a pattern or trend in the topics, then you're going to add a subcategory. And then when you find a pattern there, you're going to add a category. And out of your base level data, you now have a hypothesis for trends and patterns that occurred in your community just by using this. So if we come back, let's actually tag and track that here. So this is a problem, it's a power outage, it's environmental. What did we actually say on this? Let's just go with example, right? And now that we have this, let's pop back over to our data sheet. Where's the dashboard gone? I don't know where the dashboard is gone. Oh, there it is. We can come back here, refresh that data. Come back into view. I need the edit bar to go away. Come on. There we go. Then we can come into community culture or something like that, and you'll see it now placed in the top 5 and worst 5 kudos. And then under the community performance team, you might see it pop up here. So now we have a trend on, where's our Twitter platform? So that's Slack channel. So here's Twitter. And in Twitter, we have a record count of 3 people saying in the category opportunity, there are 2 opportunities. And then in that opportunity, one is collaboration and one is an example. And then in this example, one is bridging capital that was just added. And then one of collaboration is now bonding capital. And you can click on these actual forms and it will self-organize your entire dashboard. So when you start to see, I've now gone into this scope of collaboration, you can now get more information on it. And if you want to, I've also placed a button here for you to add an entire tag analysis button that literally anyone can access. And the difference between boards or dashboards, dashboards are like the dashboard on your car. You want to know how fast are you going? Should you speed up? Should you slow down? Should you pump the brakes? Reports are like when something goes wrong, right? Or when something is confusing or you have questions that you want to answer, you pop the hood. You click on this full tag analysis and it pulls up whatever report you want. It could be in PowerPoint, it could be in Adobe, wherever you want to build that report. It could be an Excel spreadsheet, right? But you can attach that and people can dive into the data proper. So that's kind of one of the main tools or main systems that you can use. You can also see that happen with the Net Promoter Score. One of the things that I strongly recommend for Net Promoter Score is to have multiple Net Promoter Scores that are divided by category. So you'll have a Net Promoter Score for event, a Net Promoter Score for sales, a Net Promoter Score for support. And then you'll actually have a breakdown of this Net Promoter Score based upon category. And I can actually show you, let's actually do that because we have time. Let's edit. Let's pop into this Net Promoter Score section here, and let's add a control for a advanced filter. And we're going to pop that advanced filter here. Bring it down. Right. Actually, no, not an advanced filter. Let's do a drop-down list. So we're going to attach a drop-down list right here, and we are going to pull this from Google Analytics, and we are going to pull it from the Google Analytics audience name. So now that it's in Analytics, you can now pull it down, and right now it says all users. But let's say we go to our Analytics dashboard, and let's create an audience for sales conversations. And we can go to configure. Oh, right, they moved configure, my bad. Move into our audiences, new audience, and we are going to create one specifically for non-purchasers based upon the event lead. And then once we've set that, basically these are people who have lead and who have on their CRM the contact event. And once we've created that, let's say we saved it, what's going to happen is it's just going to pop up here now, and the audience that you selected is going to be here. And now you're able to divide your net promoter score based upon the scope because you're collecting your net promoter score through Google Analytics on lead and on sales contact. Does that all make sense? And keep in mind your marketing team, you don't need to know how Google Analytics is going to work. Your marketing team will do this for you. I'm going to stop sharing. I feel like I'm overloading now. Thoughts, opinions? I'm not going to lie. I was expecting a lot more questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
As someone who can go down the rabbit hole of analytics and spend 12 hours and not even blink on it, how often do you go out and measure? Like, how often do you do it once a week? Do you
Great
do
question.
it once a day? Because I'd be doing it like, oh, it's noon, it's time for me to do it. You know what I mean?
Great question. That actually dovetails into the last part of the system that I haven't actually shown everyone here. Like I was expecting that we would run out of time by the time we actually got to this point. But the whole purpose of the social scientific process is for you to be benchmarking off of prior data and forecasting future data using the same data set at all times. That means that you should be inputting data, tagging that data, and reporting on that data perpetually. So this is a cycle, right? But in order to make this work in your daily life, what I recommend is that you teach your team to import the data into the spreadsheet manually at first. Whenever they see something interesting in the community, ask them to pop it into the sentiment tracker, just like we did with the Twitter messages, right? And then at the end of every day, ask your team to submit a journal entry of how that day went. What interesting things did they run into? What problems did they run into? And then have them code it. And every Friday, right? Like on Monday, you want to set your precedents. On Friday, you want to report on them as like an example. It doesn't need to be that way, but whenever it's time for you to actually analyze things, take about half an hour to an hour if you're like feeling it to pop into that data, read through some journal entries, mark them as highlighted, read through some sentiment data, start cataloging them. And what I want you to do is I want you to implement on a very regular basis. You cannot miss this. Have a stakeholder meeting with a member from each department responsible for cataloging or tagging the data. Because remember, these are tags that go into Common Room. They go into Orbit, whatever community intelligence platform you want. This is the strategy that you have for tagging. But if your team isn't tagging everything the same way, if a specific piece of sentiment data means something different to your marketing team than it does for your community team, you need to have a way to establish the definition. And that's where you scale your information using the terms and definitions codex. So for each term in your tag, topic, subcategory, and category, have a codex that says, here's how we nest it. Here's what this term means. Transparency to us means when a customer just gets it and knows more about who we are. Here's an example. LaborJack, one of my prior clients, is exactly what it claims to be, a service where you schedule college kids to help you do stuff. Yep, they get it. Awesome, perfect, great. So now you can add the transparency tag and then tell us when to use it and when not to use it. So as a rule of thumb, you should not use transparency when the words pinpoint to why this feels authentic or personable. And you should not use the term when it has to do with a customer service representative, because it's not talking about the brand. When it has to do with how useful the LaborJack app is, then you don't want to mark it as transparency. You want it to mark as utility. And once you have this system well enough defined, all of your setup terms will have an entry in your codex. And you could literally just grab the intern from the support team who's only been operating for a week and just be like, we want you to go through your sentiments And we want you to tag this content according to what these terms mean. And over time, these terms, they will start very transparent. Like everyone's going to have completely different definitions for what transparency is in community. And even worse, we have a trust factor. But just by virtue of making sure that your terms are tagged and flagged and cataloged properly, you're going to end up having every Friday a conversation about what trust means in your company. What better way to frame a discussion about the value, importance, and ROI of community than to say, we all understand what trust means. And further, we can now put a number to it, right? In your, sorry, I'm in edit. So in your community culture flag, here's what transparency means. Here's how many times it got tagged. And here's the percentage total of our total reputation that we pulled out of the community. All of this because of an inductive spreadsheet. And when you go into Common Room or when you go into Orbit or anything like that, because you have proper definitions for your tags, because you've filtered all of this, now when you go into your home setup, all of this data is all collated, transferred, and integrated into your dashboard, giving you these numbers, and they actually mean something. Long-winded answer, because I kind of felt like we had more than enough time for it, but that's how your codex works. And that's how you calibrate, scale, and encourage multiple people to start tagging in your system. It's called an inductive data process, and it's called codification. Does that answer that question?
Yes, it's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, and Josh, like the whole tag soup idea is a big problem. Like the whole point is to not make it tag soup, because it's all about having a social scientific process that catalogs, flags, tags, and abstracts your tags. So it's not just a bunch of tags, right? It actually provides a structure to the quantified data. So if we go back into view mode and then we pop into, being an editor sucks. Come on, get rid of the edit bar. There we go. Oh, and it refreshes. So when we go into your community team performance, we want all your tags to catalog from tags to topics to subcategories to categories. So we want 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's a nice little sunburst chart that says, this is how many times bridging capital was built in our community as a result of X example. And this is how it gets cataloged as an opportunity for us to interact on Twitter. And these 4 layers, literally anyone can come in and be like, why is this wedge so big? And then you can see, oh, snap, we've gotten a ton of opportunities in Twitter. So your tag soup becomes a structured data principle just by virtue of using the social scientific process to abstract it. Tag soup is not delicious. Yeah, I agree. Sorry, I kind of went off on a rant on that. I'm not going to lie. We have way more time to talk about this than I thought we did. So like we have plenty of time to play around with it, to copy it. Yeah. Other questions, other thoughts, use of the system?
What about taking this data and applying it to other internal platforms? I'm just thinking like, just take tagging, for example. I don't know if you have a point of view of this, but you know, like there's a knowledge base platform and there's an academy, right? So all these different companies have different platforms. Just kind of your experience or a recommendation about like how to think about it holistically, right? Because we're all, you know, we all want to move community out from this, what I call the sad world of siloed add-on and just discussion threads to a more integrated approach.
Yeah, so Josh can probably talk about this as well. I explicitly prevented the idea of exporting your data from your Data Studio dashboard into another system, because truth be told, like that opens up a lot. There's APIs, there's rectifying the data, and we can talk about that. I'll actually be putting that into my full-fledged metrics training months from now. So like
Mhm.
this training on CLG is going to be a training about how to get started with community. But when I do my 4th e-course, which is all going to be about community metrics, development, and growth, we'll go into this a lot further. But
Mhm.
the reality is Google Analytics 4, let's take that as an example. It is now universally adapted by your marketing team. And the core of Google Analytics 4 is the website. And let's say you're running a gated forum on that website. You can point Google Analytics at your forum. And because Google Analytics is now event-based, there's more information I'll post. Scott, if you wouldn't mind posting the link to the marketer side of this discussion in February. I go further into this, but because Google Analytics 4 is tracking your website and your community is a forum gated on your website, you point Google Analytics 4 at your forum, and then you ask it to collect the atomic metrics for the behaviors from Google Analytics 4. And now Google Analytics 4 audiences is defining your community scopes. That's a marketing tool, right? Like you don't even need Common Room for that. But here's the advantage, right? Let's say that marketing has developed all of these audiences and they want to start tagging them in. Because Google Analytics 4 is collecting more than just community interactions, it's collecting actual marketing interactions. You can grab those audiences from Google Analytics 4 and from this Looker Studio dashboard, export that CSV file, and then you can go through, tag that information, and upload it to Common Room. And now what does Common Room have? Common Room has a way higher resolution understanding of your community impacts and audiences. And you can now train your Common Room data and the Common Room AI for interactions based off of the audiences that you're seeing in Google Analytics 4. Now that's way complex. It's very, very early because Google Analytics is Google Analytics 4 is very early in its implementation. Common Room is early in its implementation. I don't recommend doing this yet, but I can say that's where we're going. And for the more advanced data flow engineers, like if you have a large enough community, like Keystone Symposia had a dedicated data flow engineer. Atlassian has their own dedicated community reporting team. Those teams, once they get advanced enough, they can start adding APIs to make this data in Data Studio talk to other platforms. And you can use your audience scope analysis to decide when tags and flags fire in funnels or don't fire in funnels, when marketing should be involved, and when marketing can't be involved in community. So that opens up this huge can of worms. And Josh, if you want to talk more on that from Common Room's perspective, you're welcome to. Julie, if you want to talk more on that from Orbit's perspective, you can also do that. But yeah.
I think with sentiment and what probably a lot of vendors in this space are learning it's really like the advances in AI, NLP, machine learning plus sentiment. There are a ton of pros and cons depending on the type of community you're running. So like many of our customers of course are like going to be open source, open core, DevRel, where whenever someone's running into a problem, doesn't mean that it's not necessarily negative sentiment, but it's always negative. Like I'm running into an issue that is negative, like that it will always score negative. And so what's interesting is there's a lot of interest around sentiment, but we've learned because we've had this implementation for so long that like the value of it and how you use it is very specialized. Now on the categorization front, like the more advanced use cases with NLP and so forth, in my opinion, that can unlock a tremendous amount because that grouped with like keywords, that's where you get to understanding everything from like what content should we be developing, who are the individuals that care about what, how do we hyper personalize an experience for a community member to feed into, say, an outcome for the business. And that's where like you can get into like an actual scalable community journey. Today, that I don't see companies doing that. It's always like on the backs of some amazing community managers, some volunteers in the community, which are essentially like employees that just care. And that's why it's hard to invest in it, because you can't repeatedly say, we're going to get this out of it, because it's really heroes that are doing the work today.
I agree. Very well said. Does anyone else have anything they want to say on that topic?
I did start sharing my video. I was trying to share my video at some point and it didn't let me, so all good.
I gotta say,
Yeah.
I was pleasantly surprised and very happy that I'm able to like dive so deep into these concepts. Scott and I had several conversations where I'm like, am I getting too far into the weeds?
It's hard. Like when I look at this, I was like, damn, like how many people would be able to implement this without a lot of help? Because it's not just the like understanding of like your codexes and building your sheets out, but it's also the labeling of content. Yeah, clearly there are platforms that may be able to help that depending on accessibility and all that kind of stuff. But for me, I think one of the value here is like how the depth of thought that you put into this, the hierarchies and so forth. It's like, I know how our tags are implemented in our platform. And it's like, that would be a way we could improve it. And so like, I'm getting a lot out of this, but I had a feeling I would regardless. But what really appealed to me about the session was just knowing that you work with so many different types of communities, you're having to tie to different outcomes and metrics. And so I'm curious, like which ones you would put front and center, because when I talk to like a developer relations leader, the second you start saying, okay, well, like, what are the OKRs of your boss's boss or your boss? And they'll be like, oh, we need to do activation and this and that. And I was like, okay, well, so if you want to tie, like you want them to care about what you're doing, you have to tie to one of those numbers. And but I'm like, that means you actually own improving it. And that's when people get scared. And I think we're at that like bridge we have to cross as an industry to say, we actually have to tie ourselves to this. Otherwise and hold ourselves accountable to do it. Otherwise, we're always going to be kind of at the whims of the business.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I implemented the infrastructure that I did, right? Like give me a moment, let me actually pull it up. Back at the presentation, I'm getting so lost in my slides recently. But that's why I set it up to be this way, you know? Wait, did I ever actually share? Yeah, I did. Yeah, I shared. But that's why I set it up as all C-suite cares about is results and how. And all your team cares about is what precedents are you setting and what momentum is there. Because if you start collecting responsibility and start claiming wins for the behaviors and sentiment in your community, you will automatically already lost, because there's no way you as a team have a direct control over the ultimate growth and post factors of your community. So you have to separate these two. And this is what's telling you whether or not your community is healthy. Your C-suite doesn't care if your community is healthy. They care if it's growing and producing revenue. You have to set forward precedents that accomplish both and then build momentum for each to happen. And that's why it's a what's in it for me model. So you record your behaviors and sentiment with great levels of detail on a cultural level so that you can understand what precedents you need to set and how they're being performed. And then after that, you say, okay, 1,000-foot level, how are we doing? What's the great scope situation going on?
Yeah, for me, I always think of these as like leading and lagging indicators. And if you're running a large team, you may have them focus on those leading indicators and how they're influencing those without having to worry about the lagging indicators, which are what you actually own as the leader.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I do have something I want to bring up, but.
And it's interesting. And on the go-to-market side, like your sales leader owns the company number, and then individual sales reps own a portion of that. And they may not even actually add up to the overall number because of how you're growing and whatnot. And if you have an individual, it's kind of like when you're taking on a big project, or the other day I was working with a customer that there were like 900 questions unanswered in their community. And I was like, let's not focus on all 900. Let's focus on 100, the top 100 that matter because of what you've constituted being the most important, either persona to help out, use cases to help out on, or whatever.
Well, at that point,
I'm just
here's what
curious
I would
about
do.
how you would prioritize those.
Yeah.
You start-
So for the 900,
Yeah.
oh, are you asking Josh or me? It occurs.
Well, I'm just curious what you guys would, Josh, what you guys would recommend about, right? There's 900, where to start, where to start.
So this is like a hard answer for a community professional, but at the end of the day, if you have 900 questions and you have a team of 2, you have to prioritize based on what's going to deliver the biggest benefit for the business. And so if the business is all around, like we have to cater to our enterprise accounts, then using a signal like what account or anybody that belongs to a company of this size, and filter down to what are the open questions from these type of companies. That's one way. The other way you could do it is like, if I'm more on the individual level, thinking like we're really trying to build our advocates, then I'd want to do it by something like who have been the most engaged, most involved, based on like whether it's the orbit model or like some other scoring mechanism, but prioritizing answering the questions for those people, because you know that like they're the ones that are already investing, and so you want to reinforce those perhaps. But I guess it depends, but I would find some rubric that makes sense for what your goals are as a community and a company.
Yeah, and I would go the opposite way. If you have 900 messages and you were to code those 900 messages using social science, you're going to find some very critical, important trends and patterns in that data. In that same way, 900 is absolutely enough of a large enough data set that any SEO specialist is going to look at that and go, whoa, that's a treasure trove. And simultaneously, you have a bunch of product people who are like, why are people not finding the right answers? So the question is not to answer all of those questions. The question is to abstract that and be like, we have 900 completely different answers and no tool or methodology for us to manually keep up with it. Why is there not a system here to resolve that problem? And what you do at that point is you start to say, hey, let's have a audience symposium or an AMA or something along those lines to be like, let's have all your questions answered, turn that into content, give it to the content marketing team to be like, a bunch of community members just ask these questions, please go make content on it, and then start to play around with the methodology that shows those 900 people. And almost immediately you've saved a tremendous amount of support deflection as a result of saying, here are the trends and patterns across all of these 9 about the issues that we are not answering well enough about our product.
I think that's definitely a more strategic and holistic approach. I think the reality of walking into a forum where all the questions are unanswered is poses its own problems too, though.
Agreed. And there are also some cases where people will jump to a forum to ask a super temporary question, and the forum is less likely to receive a response than a we call them, so I'm going to jump, I'm going to do the thing that I'm known for. Academically speaking, there's a difference between a low context platform and a high context platform. High context platforms are more permanent in nature, like forum posts or something along those lines. They last for a really long time, but they're also slower to receive responses. Whereas low context platforms, they're happenings, they're engagements, they're gatherings, they're places where people talk, but it's so difficult to understand the context because everything is just blindingly fast. A lot of people will make a decision to be like, we put our community on Slack, and then they will have no high context answer to that. Slack is a low context platform where people are engaging all the time, but nothing is permanent. And then your forums are places where things are permanent, and people who are using them with low context intentions, like having a conversation, hey, how are you? That's viewed as annoying because you're producing too much data that just sticks around. A healthy, viable community will have a low context and a high context solution as part of their communities and a way to interact between the two in order to send people to the right place. And it's plausible that of your 900 questions, you'll need to do your abstraction for this. Of those 900 questions, how many of those are better served on a low context platform like a chat box? I feel like a mic drop moment there.
I think like it's the thing is, when most companies have so few brains architecting and able, like everybody's just hanging on and maybe shipping a new channel or a new program here and there while just keeping up with it. It's like I appreciate such a I would say like a thorough and deep thought, because I feel like community is always just like, we're going to do it and we're going to stay and we're going to keep it going and hopefully measure a little bit. And we think it'll pay off and this and that. Whereas like, if you can take a step back, which I don't think most of us get to do, and say, if we were to architect this correctly, like, can we actually do a 3 or 5 year plan around it? Now today it'd be really hard with AI. However, no, I love to hear your experience on it.
So what was the question? I
It
don't know.
wasn't a question, it was just a comment on that, like how you're architecting a community and how you're thinking about the different channels and how you build it from scratch. Like, I don't feel like we get a lot of time to do that. Like when we built Uncommon, start off with a community practice because we didn't have a product yet. And it was a newsletter that turned into a Slack channel. We thought about adding a discourse, but then like as we started to launch a product, but we're like, there's no way we're gonna have enough questions to fill it. And so then we're like, you know what? Like there are other communities of practice out there too, for community. So why don't we just try adding a couple channels in here for a product? And like they'll coexist and like, let's see how it goes. And it's actually worked pretty well for us so far. But we don't need like meetups. We'll do those occasionally. But today, where we go from here, architecting there's uncertainty, and like, is this what it is and where it's valuable? Because we're doing great content collaborations now. So yeah.
I agree. And like in Orbit, I was tagged by Amanda. She wanted to bring up this concept of like, is there any one framework or process that you can have for building a community? Is there like a checklist? And it's like, well, the very definition of a community is that it's a unit of culture. So you have to build a culture composed of practices, values, shared goals, shared experiences, and you have to produce artifacts of all of that inclusion. And all that activity results in belonging. Mm-hmm. How are you going to build a process that encourages that on your own in any other way than to ask the individuals who step into your limited space how they want it to be constructed? Yeah. So is there a checklist for building community? Not really, but there is a checklist for all of the things, all of the parts of community that you need to have built.
Yeah.
The way I look at it is there's a process, a line of questioning, which doesn't sound nice, but there's a kind of a line of questioning to figure out like what community can be, or more, even higher than that, what the ecosystem of platforms or should be as well. Right. Mm-hmm. So there are people who, how comfortable they are with technology, how comfortable they are with like, do they want to use a Slack versus discussion forums? Do they want to read articles from other practitioners, or, so I think it's not starting with a community in mind, but starting with kind of like, you've heard me talk about anthropology. Well, you talked about, what is it? It's not anthropology. Ethnography?
Ethnography, yeah.
Yeah, kind of that approach, right? Mm-hmm. Understanding the tools that people have today or what they might feel comfortable with using tomorrow.
Yeah. And truth be told, like the spreadsheet that I offered is literally just making a anthropological research process available for your use on a daily basis as a community manager. Like it's got a
Yeah.
field journal. It's got a place for you to put comments, which could be interviews, they could be survey responses, all of that qualitative data. What I'm asking you to do really in order to create this inductive abstraction process for data is to play the anthropologist for your own community, because that's what you are, you know, like your job is to find precedents out of trends and patterns and then say, okay, so it looks like there's this precedent in this community and we need to tweak it a little bit. So how are we going to go about doing that now? And then you set your precedent and you build momentum to make that change. And then you go back into your experimentation phase and you say, well, how'd it go? What actually happened? What changes, trends, or patterns happened in my culture this time around? You're an anthropologist. Like it's very much so a miniature anthropological study.
Yeah. So
I
we have
think
about 6
that's about
minutes,
it.
but do we need the 6 minutes?
Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions? I'm not gonna lie, I was like obsessed for the past month over, oh my God, how am I gonna fit this all into its time? But I kind of feel like where did we save all the time? Maybe. I don't know. What happened?
I actually want to talk offline because what I'm going to ask is more around things that you and I know about, like open source related, and
Oh yeah.
because my head's very deep in that right now, and my head is also exploding in the best possible way. I think this is
Yeah.
really gorgeous, and thank you. And you know, I could see myself spending like entire weekends on this.
What I will say is what I would really like to do now is, now that we have the workshop and the e-course for CLG building, to be like, here's the general concept of what this looks like. I'd like to be able to actually dive deeper now and just be like, okay, so for each piece of technology, let's talk about how you implement it in each piece of technology. How do you implement it in a Discord-based CIP like Homeroom? How do you implement it in a Slack-based CIP like Communify? How do you implement it in a brands-focused CIP like Common Room? How do you implement this in a software-focused CIP like Orbit? How do you go about doing that? You know, and I know I also say this knowing that Common Room has definitely started to move into an open source approach, but I would really like to like focus on those hyper specific implementations to be like, see, the tool doesn't matter. I don't care how sophisticated any of these CIPs actually get. If you start approaching it without a methodology, it will mean nothing, you know? That's what I would like the next step to be.
Awesome. So any other kind of questions or anything that,
Rachel
just
or Heather?
what?
Rachel or Heather?
I am absorbing and also a community of practice, so not tied in with product or our larger organization, but trying to figure out how to use this for what's going on within the community, so that we can have the conversations and talk to the executives about how we're doing indirect value instead of direct.
Yeah, and it's really just about, for you specifically as a community of practice, we can probably talk more about this like privately, like we can hop on a consult call or something. But my guess, my suspicion is that you'll have significantly fewer layers of abstraction to deal with, but you'll have more data across each layer. So the question is, how exactly are you going to make that viable for you and your team to manage on a day-to-day basis?
Exactly, especially since I am the team.
Yeah, exactly. And for that, I recommend as soon as we get off, submit your first journal entry. Just focus on journaling for now.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah. All right, I think we're done.
Yep. So just a quick wrap up here. So thanks, everybody. We were going to do like a little NPS survey, but I think we're small enough here that if you have any feedback for either of us about, I mean, we're all in this together. So like, is there something you wanted more of, something you wanted less of? Any feedback will really help us. And then this will be a course in the CLG campus in the next month or so. And every Wednesday at this time, we do have events going on the CLG campus, so you can check out those events. Soon we're going to be talking about next week, we're going to be talking about advocacy and then customer reviews. So keep checking out the campus, and just want to thank everybody for coming today.
I have a quick question.
Go for it.
Is there a way to like have an ongoing registration? Like just assume that let's just assume that I want to do maybe month to month. Is there a way to do that in an automated way where I can be like, yes, I want to attend these 4 or whatever. I want to stay registered for these afternoon.
Yeah.
Courses because I think I see the value.
So, just to level set, some will be about community, some will be more about like customer-led growth. 2 is I can add you to the list so that you get, and it's always in my newsletter as well that I send out. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. If you have any questions, please follow up with our host today, our professor, our leader, and all that. And look forward to seeing you on the CLG campus. Thank you.